In this lab I want to see how to create this helical spring in SolidWorks. So the length of the spring will be 66, the outside diameter or OD will be 29, and the wire diameter will be 3, and we're going to grind the ends of it flat. So let's look at how to set this up. So I'll start a new sketch on the front plane, and I'm going to do a rectangle from the origin going over to the right, and then I'm going to change all of this geometry to construction geometry. And then I'm going to draw a circle on this line, but not at the midpoint of the line. I'll put it down here and to the end of this line, about like that. Now I want to parameterize this with some global variables, so I'm going to go to Tools and I'll go to Equations, and let's create several global variables. I'm going to call the first one OD, and I'll give that the dimension of 29. I'll hit the Tab key, and then I'll click to add a new variable. I'm going to call this one height, H-E-I-G-H-T, and I'm going to call that height 66. Hit the Tab key, and I will add another global variable. I'm going to call this wire underscore DIA for wire diameter, and I'm going to give that a value of 3, and I'll say OK to this. Alright, so let's go back to editing this sketch, and so I will then dimension the distance from the center line. Make sure you pick the center line to this endpoint. Make sure you select the endpoint, and then if I get down here, it's radius, but I want the diameter, so I'm going to click up here and I'm highlight that value, and I'll do equal. And when I do equal, I could get this choice to select global variables, and I want that to be equal to the OD. And then make sure you hit this green check mark here, because you want it to put that global variable in as the value, and it shows then that symbol that it's the global variable. We don't want to just enter the 29, we want that as the global variable. And notice the summation symbol indicating that that's a parameter. And then I'm going to do this length, and again I'll do equal, and I'll go to the global variable height, and I'll click this check mark, and then OK. Then I'll dimension this circle. I'll do equal global variable wire diameter. I'll say OK to that. Alright, then I'm going to finish this sketch, and I'm going to start a new sketch on the front plane, and I'm going to convert entities this line right here, and I'll say OK to that. And I'm done with this sketch. So I'll finish that sketch, and I will create a third sketch on the front plane. I'm going to draw a rectangle about like that. I want the midpoint of this rectangle to be at the origin of this vertical line. I want the midpoint of this vertical line to be at that point. So I'll select that point, I'll hold down the control key, I'll select this midpoint, and I'll do coincident. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So I'll select the midpoint of this line, and I'll select this point, and I'll do coincident. Right, then I want the width of this to equal the height. So I'll select these two lines, and I'll do equal, and we have a square now that's all fully constrained. We'll finish that sketch. Right, I'm going to drag my roll-up bar up to hide sketch number 3, so that only sketch number 1 and 2 are visible. I'm then going to go into the swept boss base, and I'm going to sweep this circle along this line with a twist. Now I really didn't need to create that circle, because I could have just selected this circular profile option, and then SolidWorks would create the whatever diameter I give it. But imagine that this wasn't a circle, that it was some other shape, so I wanted to show it with a general profile. So it asked me to select a profile. I'll select this circle as my profile. And then I need to select the path. Now I have a problem, because I put a construction line underneath that to give me the diameter dimension. So I need to make sure I get the object line that is in the sketch 2 rather than the construction line. So I'm going to right click, and I'll do select other, and I get a list of the elements or entities that are in that location, and I want to get this object line in sketch 2, and then I'm going to go to options, and where it says profile twist, instead of none, I'm going to tell it to specify a twist value, and then instead of number of degrees, I'm going to tell it number of revolutions, and I'll tell it 9 revolutions. I'll then say OK to that. Okay, so we see our spring swept along that line with 9 revolutions. I'm going to change this to some other color, so I'll come up here to the top node and I'll go to the index spring that I've saved the name as index spring. I'll change that appearance, and I'm going to pick some color. You can pick whatever color you like, and then I'm going to cut off the ends to flatten those. So I'm going to drag the roll-up bar down to show that rectangular sketch, and I'll highlight that sketch, and then I'm going to do extrude cut, and for the distance I'm going to tell it to go through both directions, but I don't want to cut the area inside the box. I want to cut the area outside of the box, so I'm going to tell it to flip the side to cut. And so now it's just going to cut this little piece off of here and that piece off the end over on that side. I'll say OK to that. Now I may want to take the paint off of this face and this face. So I'll right click or select it and then go to that face appearance. And I'm going to set that to some nondescript color. And I may also want to select this face and the 2 faces on the other side as well, this face and this face, and I'll say OK to that. Okay, so I've taken the paint off of those faces. Now let's see if SolidWorks will put a temporary axis through this. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to and I see that view temporary axis is not available. So I want to put an axis through here to be used in the future to constrain this in assembly. So I can do that either as an intersection of the front and top planes, or I could do that on the sketch. These 2 features can't be deleted, so it would be safest to do the intersection of those 2. So I'm going to go to my reference geometry and I'll click axis, and I'll select 2 planes, and for the 2 planes that I'm going to select, I'll select the front plane and the top plane. And so we see it's going to put that axis through there, and I'll say OK to that. So if I turn on the visibility now of axes, so we see that axis, we can use this later on when we are assembling our geometry in the assembly. And so let's save this again. And now I want to create a second spring with different parameters. So I'm going to do a save as. So I'll do File, Save As, and I'm going to call the second spring, and I meant to call that one Punch Spring. So let's call this one, I'll rename that, and I'm going to call that Punch Spring. Okay, and then I'm going to close Punch Spring or open up the index spring, and I'll edit the index spring. So I'll open the index spring. I'm going to change the color of the index spring. So I'll right click, I'll go to the appearance of the index spring, and I'm going to change that to some other color. And let's put these side by side, and so let's make sure we have both of them open. And so do I have the punch spring still open? So I'll go to window, and I'll tile these vertically. And so over here I have the index spring, and here I have the punch spring. I want to edit the index spring, so I'll go to the index spring, and I'll expand the equations. I'm going to right click and I'll say manage these equations, and for the OD I'm going to change this to 18, and for the height I'm going to change the height to 47, and for the wire diameter I'm going to change that to 2. We'll say OK to those changes in size. And I also want to reduce the number of turns, so I'm going to edit that sweep feature, and instead of 9 turns, let's do 8 turns. Okay, so we've changed the sizes of our spring, and we have 2 different springs now.